Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Palantir Weekly. This is episode number 111. We are here today after a pretty monumental week in the world of Palantir. I've got Arnie, Vince, Maddie Capital, and Dom with me. Palantir broke through $26 this week. At one point, it reached $27.50. It ended the week just under $26 at around $25.90, but still a pretty monumental week for Palantir in terms of what it was able to get done. Two big things was the Titan contract, Bank of America upgrade / Wedbush upgrade, and then obviously AIP Con. So a lot to talk about. We're going to dissect everything. I think we'll start off with Titan because it was really weird. So Monday, we got a Louis De Palma, William Blair note that we're probably going to get the deal, but it was kind of painted in a bearish sense in terms of the revenue from that deal wouldn't be that substantial. And then we get the deal, and the street reacted totally the opposite way that I think William Blair thought the street would react, because they were very excited for the fact that we got the deal. So let's start off with you, Dom. What was your analysis on us getting that deal, and why do you think the street reacted the way they did?
Well, I think it's just becoming more of a reality of how impactful Palantir is on both. One, they wanted to see some government wins, right? So now all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, they're back on track with government. And we knew that government's just lumpy. You're going to deal with budgets. You're going to deal with continuous resolution. It's big ebbs and flows, big dips. And I think this was just another project that was talked about so much that people were really hoping that we would win. And also what's really big about this one is it's a program that's involved with a lot of other manufacturers. Believe it or not, NVIDIA is actually powering some of the hardware in Project Titan. They were at some road shows actually together a couple months ago. Hey, Code Straps in the chat. So I think that's the biggest thing is just that's why everyone was piling in. I mean, and you look at the average deal size. I mean, we're talking millions and millions of dollars every time we talk about a deal with Palantir. There's just not many people doing those kind of transactions consistently. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Okay. Vince, your take on the deal.
I mean, for me, the biggest thing was that they are a software prime now. And I think that's also what the street reacted so much on, because it opens the door of them getting a lot more contracts, and also even within Titan getting a lot more, because this is just delivering 10 prototypes of this funny looking AI designed vehicle. And that was the positive reaction on it.
Okay. Arnie, your perspective on this deal.
You know, I distrust Rishi so much that when he essentially spoiled that Palantir was so close to getting that deal, I was, come on, it means we are lost it. Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, if you think of it, he essentially gave kind of insider information. How the hell he knew about that? So we potentially had the opportunity. But apart from that, more specifically to the contract, I think it is not good. It is great that we finally got this. The amount is big, 180 million for 2 years, but that doesn't go all to Palantir. Palantir becomes the key contractor, managing essentially the contract, also with the other suppliers. But it is truly the power of opening the doors, as Vince said, and giving the signal, okay, the US Army is now ready to embrace software, obviously with a heavy component of hardware, but this hardware that is emerging will be software-defined first. So to conceptualize is like the difference between a normal car and a Tesla. A normal car is hardware where you put some software inside of it. A Tesla is a software-defined vehicle. Everything is built to integrate perfectly with the experience and to maximize the output. That's the difference.
All right. And Matt, your perspective on this contract.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. I think the word that I would use for Palantir going forward is inevitable. I think the thing that people are starting to recognize, or at least if they haven't yet, they should, is understanding that they're a company that does what they say. And I think what most people, and the reason why I say inevitable is we knew that this was going on in the background. We knew that this was something that was inevitable. They've won the NHS contract. They've won Titan. You expected them to act in Ukraine. You expected them to act in Israel. And what do? They do exactly what you expect them to do because that's what their values align to. And I think the thing that's most exciting about this is we've now seen the full cycle for Palantir, where they literally had to sue the United States government and the Army specifically to be able to get contracts in the past, to now being a prime contractor for them, as Vince had already alluded to. So I think this is just a key piece in the further foundation that Palantir is going to continue to build off of. And with that, I think people need to truly recognize that this is a company that is going to be here. And I think it's starting to come back to me. The things that Sachin and many of us have talked about in the past, like, are they actually going to be able to achieve these metrics? And I'm assuming a lot of what we're talking about, so I'm kind of prefacing what we're going to talk about later on in the segment, so I won't dive too much. But it's starting to eliminate some of my concerns about the organization and speed and everything like that. They are very meticulous. They are very certain about the things that they do. And that's truly starting to shine through. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that when we get to AIPCon.
I mean, is it true that the government slowdown was essentially the only key concern left?
I think so. I mean, it was the only metric on the earnings report that wasn't growing. So
international also, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, so Mariana upgraded the stock to $28 from Bank of America, primarily based on the thesis that if they got Titan, they're going to get more in the whole JATC 2 kind of complex of contracts that are going to come out. So it does. I do agree with Matt. It does feel a bit inevitable now that this thing's going to scale, barring some type of commercial slowdown that proves AIP is not the real thing, which I think after this conference, we do think it's the real thing now.
Well, let me say, do you remember when Danivs said there's a very big difference between government revenues and commercial revenues related to AI in terms of perception from Wall Street? I think the same can be applied also between US and international revenues. Like US revenues, especially from the commercial side, are way more valuable, because also from the conversation I had with an Italian friend who actually lives in the US, he told me, I personally neither care what the commercial revenues are in the international in Europe, because I know that is kind of stuck. But on the US, once you start getting traction, once you start getting that, let's say 20, 30% penetration, then the road to 50% becomes way faster. And from 50% to the total penetration becomes incredibly faster, because you become a standard. So on the international side, I think Europe, we need to accept, okay, probably will not see something crazy. But on the US side, it's important we keep rocking. And I think the Asia side will be more important than Europe.
Okay. So let's talk about AIPCon. AIPCon was absolutely incredible. Lot of good stuff in AIPCon. There was a ton of presentations to talk through. Let's do high level overview, and then we'll get into some specific presentations. Or if it's when it's your turn to talk, you can just talk about the presentations you like the most. Let's start with Dom. What presentation excited you the most, and what did you get out of this conference that maybe is a little bit different than the other two conferences that we've seen?
Yeah, I'll be completely honest. Due to personal things going on, did not get to see the full conference. I saw just Carps and the beginning of Lennar. But what I can say from a highlight perspective, just put it in the chat, 60 customers got to showcase what they were doing. That's a lot more than before. 20 plus new customers and partners. And they had more customers leading their own AIP boot camps. And I saw some great comments on Twitter or X earlier tonight around the network effects that could do. and hands-on keyboard and the best selling. When you verticalize and have customers leading how they're doing what they're doing, and having all the same people in those kind of industries in a room together, you can literally transform industries that way. And you look at with AIP Marketplace, even Ted Mabry, who heads up commercial head for sales for Palantir, said we may have to look at possibly exploring vertical sales again. We tried to stay away from that. We tried to focus on just really looking at customers individually, but they're having so much success in particular industries, and they're learning the problems that those industries have, that they're accelerating their sales motions. And now you take that a step further with AIP Con and get hands-on keyboard. You get all the different lawyers and legal practices having one of their legal customers lead an AIP boot camp. That is more convicting than any kind of PowerPoint or steak dinner, however you want to hear it. I heard him say that millions of times with Carp, and I understand what Carp's saying, because I've done SaaS sales for a very long time and understand what he's saying. Put up or shut up and get hands on keyboard. You can only do that if the product's that good, and that's what they're doing.
I agree with all that. Let's go to Vince. What did you think about AIP Con in general?
So I'm a real estate developer in Sweden, and obviously the presentation that I loved the most, it was Lenar's presentation about how they use Palantir on their building offers, because that was quite perplexing to me as a builder, like how you can use Palantir in the real estate. But overall, I feel that the presentations have gotten a lot more thin, and they were presenting less than before. And I was a bit disappointed by that. But then I realized that maybe the purpose of that is that these presentations are made to just pique interest and give ideas of what use cases can be handled. And then the customers, then when the presentations are over, they go behind the scenes back to the booths, and then whatever use case interests them, they can explore it more. And maybe then the presentations, like maybe some people were complaining that the presentations before were too long, but as an investor, it was amazing to see these longer presentations on how exactly Palantir is being used. So yeah, that's number one. Number two is that they started to do this repository of all the use cases on all the past AIPs. Again, makes it so much faster and so much better for future AIP cons, and for more companies to faster get to use cases. And number three, if we have a cockiness meter on Carp and how he speaks, I think we're getting like maximum levels, and I really love seeing it, because he is cocky on things that like he's cocky on how fast they can handle problems, and clearly it must be true, because it has been over the years, and so many boot camps and so many customers. So this guy is the real deal. He's getting a small belly. I'm also having a small belly, so I'm not fat shaming or anything, but the guy who's not having any steak dinners, he's getting a daddy belly.
I love it. Arnie, your thoughts on AIP Con in general?
I agree with what Vince said. The presentations were relatively thinner than what we saw in the past AP cons. Yet, probably there's a reason. At the beginning, you need to give more weight to actually explain what you do. Essentially, okay, this product seems cool. What it actually does. At this point, what the product does is clearer. What is really needed from the client perspective is the feeling that this stuff can actually also be applied to my industry. So rather than depth, I think they wanted to share more insight into, okay, this stuff can be really applied to any industry. And I particularly appreciated the first one, Leonard, because construction was probably the only vertical where Palantir was missing. Essentially, we had the list of industries where was everything but real estate construction. That was something, hey, that's a missing industry there, and I'm happy they check. Overall, I think what really impressed me was the idea of having bootcamps run by clients, because if we think of the consequences of this, like I like to think in terms of, okay, what is the second order effect of clients making bootcamps, is that you can have expansion inside a client, so net dollar retention, that actually comes at zero cost, because it is the client essentially spending time to evangelize internally. And then you have all the research component of AIP that we like on these events. I think what's really interesting is that they share what are the next steps. And the next step, which was the thing that was underscored at the end, is Palantir essentially is creating an automation of the bootcamp, so that a potential client can browse towards use cases. So essentially, okay, I come to a bootcamp with a clear need, or I need to solve a goal. I find the use cases already in the archetypes, or I can even get an archetype from a draft. That is completely insane. So if we think again here of what are the consequences of potentially this thing being automated, performed well, is essentially you get more customers, more happier customers in a really a fraction of the time, because you have all the archetypes, and more use cases you solve, the better you are to solve further use cases. So the loop is spinning, and the flywheel of Palantir is really spinning faster and faster.
Matt, your thoughts on AIP Conference?
Sure. Vince, you wanted to say something before I start?
No, go ahead. I'll take it after.
Very good. So I think, I wanted to kind of combat and kind of push a little bit back onto what Vince's first point was, which is the presentation seemed light. I think the presentations are very structured, and what they think they're showing most importantly is the similarities, but also the differences that each organization goes through when they apply a Foundry or AIP into their organization. If you're a CFO or a CTO or a COO that's looking at these presentations, you see companies that have they're drowning in data that is unorganized, and they basically are struggling to make prudent decisions within their organizations. And then you hear these presentations and see, wow, these guys were able to very quickly get their data in a very similar manner, not just in a regional office, but say nationwide or across a multitude of different warehouses, and start making drastic impacts. Then second, they were able to, which is kind of where the piece that is also still similar but also different, same but different, if you've watched the interview. The thought process is the data now can collect and connect to legacy applications that may have been used in the past, or customizable applications, which is very difficult if you're storing everything in Excel. Try to connect your Excel workbooks to Facebook, or your Excel workbooks to Instagram. It's not a very easy process to do. In fact, it's impossible. So having your data in something like a Foundry allows you to connect that data very seamlessly, which is very important when you're trying to make business decisions and make efficiency within your organizations. So you've now nailed two birds with one stone. You've implemented a product within your organization that, one, puts your entire organization in a collective uniform language, like we always talk about. And then two, now you have applications that can be built that communicate directly with that data that is now very well organized. And then thirdly, you have this unique thing that it's solved within each organization. So these presentations might seem light, but they're also very cookie cutter to demonstrate the ease of use within Palantir being implemented in an organization, and not necessarily Palantir per se, but Foundry and AIP specifically. And so I think it might have seemed very cookie cutter to an example, but they all had their kind of, examples of how it was easy to use, how drastically it changed a modern organization, which I think many COOs and CTOs struggle with on a day-to-day basis. What's the appropriate product to use, and how can we implement it in the fastest way possible to make a true bottom line difference? And then second or third, however many points I'm on at this point, what drastically changed for them as an organization from a monetary value perspective, efficiency perspective, or both? And I think they're very quick, and they might not go into too much detail, but I think also, before I hand it back to the room, I think a lot of that intermingling that goes on between the presentations as well as during lunchtime and also during the boot camps is really why I think a lot of people go to these AIP cons, to be able to interact with other organizations, to know people. I think it's more of a network effect, as we're kind of starting to see towards the end of the presentation that they provided. The last 10 minutes kind of demonstrated this kind of like network of applications you could apply to your organization or what have you, or these modules rather. I think people are starting to recognize that these AIP cons and Palantir as a community as a whole is really what we're looking for. We're looking to think differently. We're looking to apply products and software differently within our organizations that hasn't been done before. We're trying to reinvent how software is truly implemented in modern organizations, because previously it was literally trying to create the wheel. Now we're trying to actually create cars and things that actually move at a very fast pace, because that's the world that we're now in. And so, previously it was just, how can we use the mouse? How can we use Excel? How can we collect data? How can we manually input the data? Now data is coming so fast at us that we have to think about what's the right way to reinvent how software is created if we had to start from scratch 40 years later. And that's what Foundry is really trying to do. And now starting companies up that have been around for hundreds of years and trying to start them back at the ground floor again to make their processes as efficient and streamlined as possible, while adding value to the chain. That's where Palantir truly comes in and shows. And that's what I think those presentations did very, very well.
Well, we need to consider, as CodeStrap underscored, that what we see in the live stream is only a fraction of the overall event, because then there is like the real event in terms of networking and the smaller presentation. And I also see from a picture, there are also other clients like the one we got, halo.com.ai, who essentially made a small presentation. So we need to consider that what we see is what they want us to see from outside, and maybe also for competitive reasons. Now, they already showed actually a lot in the previous AP cons. Maybe they don't really want to show essentially everything they do, because they know there will be a lot of copycats now trying to to get their hands on it.
Yeah, it's like chess. You don't want to play your moves ahead of time. They're trying to win industries. So if they let on to who's attending or what they're doing, people are going to try to disrupt that.
Let's talk about, or Vince, yeah, go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, I just have a question, because something doesn't intuitively make sense to me, because when the customers are holding boot camps, I wonder, like, what is their incentive? Because essentially, if I am in one industry, like let's say in the oil industry, like we know that BP bought into Palantir partially to have an exclusivity agreement so that their competitors are not using Palantir. And if I am like let's say I'm Lanar, I definitely don't want my competitors, and I don't want to like onboard them onto like, look, this company revolutionized our business. This is our use cases. It's preloaded into the bootcamp. Like, you just come a few clicks, and then you are going to be exactly where we are. So
it's a good question. It's a really good question.
Yeah, I'm wondering a little bit about this, because if I was using Palantir, I would want all my competitors to be using Snow and what's the other one? C3 AI, So I'm just wondering what is the incentives there?
So wait a second. I think the higher question is what we do really mean with clients running the bootcamps. Because on my side, I understood it more each client runs the Palantir AIP bootcamps internally without essentially having to call Palantir to make it.
Like they're doing it on their own business, like their
I
own
understood
colleagues, their own.
like that, not that you have Lennar making bootcamps to the competitors. But that's the question essentially we need to solve.
Yeah.
I think, can you hear me? Yeah. I think it's a really legitimate concern, because your argument is just like, okay, so if these customers are leading boot camps, then these customers technically will not be incentivized to lead boot camps to other competitors that could get a competitive edge using AIP. I interpret it as, if you're a customer working in a certain industry, the more customers or the more of your competitors that are in that industry, it kind of creates a network effect in terms of the operational workflows you can get by using AIP altogether. So I thought of it a little differently. I also thought of it in the context of, like, if you're Lennar and you have your supply chain vendors using AIP and they're more efficient, that means you get more efficient. So you want to get them onto the platform. Like, you want to bring more people onto YouTube because you have a chance to get more people to subscribe to your channel if they're just on the platform, type of thing. So I don't know. I guess we'll see how it turns out, but that's how I interpret it as well. Let's talk about the mixed reality presentation by Panasonic. Dom, well, you didn't get a chance to watch it because I know you only got watched the first one. Arnie, what were your thoughts?
I saw a tiny bit of it on X, and I just say that it just shows they're not settling for what they already have. They're constantly innovating and thinking about where things are going to be 5 and 10 years from now. If you really paid attention on the intro on AIP Con, he talked about how, or I think this is Bloomberg interview, he talked about how we're at the tipping point of what you're seeing is the tip of the iceberg of what our product development capabilities or roadmap is. So there's much more to come, because the Bloomberg guy was trying to say, like, hey, what about a consumer product? B2C. So I think we're going to see a lot more offerings, and they're learning and absorbing while they're doing these AIP cons. And one of them is mixed reality. They understand that there will be a play. I mean, their software already works with all the different headsets. So they're forward thinking about all of that. They're not trying to lock in on hardware. So hats off to them. I can't wait to see what they do with it.
I'll say one thing real quick, then we'll go to Arnie. The real sort of insight to me about the headset and mixed reality product is that we all thought it was going to be on the battlefield and for defense. And then we see Panasonic, which is a company making batteries for Teslas, that are using it for, like, data ingestion, integration in real time. And so I think the hype on the Vision Pro has pretty much died out. A lot of people are returning it, and until they get to Gen 2, Gen 3, where it's really usable, I don't know how much they're going to sell. But on the enterprise side, it seems like Vision Pro and mixed reality has way better use cases than on the consumer side, unless you just travel a lot. So if that's the case, and then Palantir's platform can be implemented on many different enterprises using mixed reality headsets in commercial applications, that to me is a stream of revenue I don't think we thought of before, because we only thought it was going to be used by governments. And so that's the exciting part for me on that one. Arnie, go ahead.
I think this is just another case, another brilliant case where we see why splitting the company into actually makes zero sense, because this is another case like the satellite usage for then transferred to commercial uses. Here, this is tech first developed more for military use cases. We know HoloLens, Microsoft has been working on military use cases for quite a while, and now we see something that is working and that is essential for the government side, also transferred to the commercial side. Can we share the clip, since it is not that long, also for the people who maybe missed it? I don't know if you have it ready.
For the Panasonic one?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, let me pull
I have it in case.
Oh, you have it? Okay, yeah, you share.
As much as I'd love to show you a real winder, my bosses are here today. So we're going to have to use our imaginations and actually the generated reality to solve problems faster. So we walk up to this winder with our trainer. It's clearly not working, and we need to find the root cause. We have hundreds of machines like this on our production floor, each with tens of thousands of moving parts. Now, the benefit of being a state-of-the-art factory is our machines output a ton of data. So much so that we ultimately don't have the ability to analyze or digest it all on our own. Excel spreadsheets just look at it and laugh. If we look at the machine data, we can see thousands of error codes on this machine, and the trainer lets you know there could be multiple fixes for every error. Only some of the solutions are written down, the rest we're going to have to learn on the job. Sounds familiar, right? Years ago, when I started fixing these machines, it took me 3 to 6 months to feel comfortable finding solutions for even the most basic recurring issues. So I can tell you from experience, this is completely overwhelming. Now that I'm in leadership, the question for me becomes, how can I speed up this learning process? How can I empower an MT to feel confident in such an overwhelming situation and ultimately set them up for success at our company? Ask Adam, or Adam as we call it, uses AIP in our ontology to serve as a co-pilot for the technician. Adam can take a maintenance work order and link it to a wealth of information, both official and unofficial, and make suggestions about what an MT should try to resolve a problem. So let's try to troubleshoot this machine. As we walk around, we can see that there's a flashing red sensor indicating that it's a cause for the error. Adam will then take that sensor data and start building out its recommendations. Before Adam, an MT would have to search a variety of databases and manually piece together relevant information, which is a huge waste of time when you have a down machine right in front of you. Now, at their fingertips, MTs can see work that was previously done on this winder, the spare parts that were replaced, and the results of any quality investigations that took place recently. We have over 1 million tickets in our system full of tribal knowledge. Adam can read all of these comments that MTs put in and summarize in the order from easiest to hardest suggestions for how a technician should press forward. Finally, Adam can search our library of control documents and only surface relevant instructions for the problem at hand. So you can see here, we just learned from Adam that all we had to do was replace that switch. And now our machine is back to making batteries. As a last step, the technician will record their fix, and it is indexed back within the Adam system, enabling the platform to become smarter and more robust as time goes on.
So what really impressed me about this thing is first, the fact that you have that red Palantir logo flashing, that is not something, it's a nice Palantir red logo flashing there. Like, that is already insane to have that. Imagine that in a context like the battlefield. Like, since you know where the enemy is, you're like playing a video game with a cheat that gives you full visibility of where the enemy is, even if it is like behind a wall, because you have the drone capturing the information, telling you, okay, that's the enemy is there. Like, once you have that kind of knowledge, you'd really have an asymmetric advantage. Then in the context of the enterprises, imagine how that is truly helpful for any case of potential spotting places where you need to work on the maintenance. Thinking of, for instance, Boeing having troubles. So that thing alone is massive. But I think the truly important concept of this clip is not only, augmented reality is cool, but how important it is, the concept of knowledge. Like, in 1 second, essentially the technician, who's probably an engineer, who was used to spend 4 months to actually understand, okay, how do I actually solve a problem like this? It has all the knowledge that was previously built inside the company. So from transcript, from use cases, like how it was solved, that while he's in direct contact with the problem, so no interruption of the workflow. And then once he solved the problem, that automatically becomes further knowledge just by sending an audio. That was like a Apple recording feature. So nothing extraordinary. It was like when you record something on your phone, and then that audio becomes further knowledge on the company. So this is a true example of having knowledge inside a company that keeps building on top of that knowledge. That is really powerful.
And I think I want to add on to that a little bit, because with this continuous kind of interactive LLMs that you can kind of build within your organization, it truly builds on what I think a lot of people have probably heard in the past, but probably wasn't mentioned in this presentation, of digital twins. And so this is a piece where you could truly leverage and see how that piece of equipment plays into a broader factory or a broader X, Y, and Z. And the building of that digital twin can show you, where exactly you need to interact with. And a reason being is, and I can't go into too much about this, but this is something that is this VR or artificial reality sort of thing that was demonstrated by Penna, was something that I've seen personally within our organization at UDOC. You think we deal with facilities that are sometimes hundreds of miles offshore, and you can't just immediately be there in person without a helicopter ride, flying from Houston all the way to Houma, Louisiana, taking that helicopter ride offshore. So it's very easy then for somebody offshore to say, put on these goggles and be able to understand, the deferrals that are associated with. So oil production that's not being produced due to, say, a pressure differential within the tubing or within the piping that is, say, a couple hundred PSI more or less. That's, say, not allowing the oil to flow as much. It's also allowing you to see, hey, if I turn this valve, what is exactly going to happen? Because if you think about this, let me put this in perspective for you. You have valves, piping, separator tanks, big gas valves that are basically trying to keep everything encapsulated. That is, let's just say, for example, 2 European football pitches or 3 U.S. American football grids in size, and then multiply that by 3 decks. So we're talking massive amounts of equipment. Do you expect the operators that are on that facility to know what every piece of equipment does on there? And the answer is probably not, right? You'll have people that are specifically focused on this piece of equipment or that piece of equipment, and some might be electrical focused, some might be specifically piping focused, some might be painters, some might be. So this piece of artificial reality allows you to kind of blur those lines a little bit. People are now going to be able to kind of play across different functions a lot easier, because they don't necessarily need to have the focus and expertise, because now they can rely on not necessarily memorizing all that piece of kit, but really relying on the interactive piece that's been built into the language models of the organization that are proprietary to making sure that that facility produces as well as it can. And so you'll have the engineers on shore that, in our particular case, might be focusing on, say, building the digital twin and monitoring what pieces of equipment have failed and how you can source that from other places. But then you'll have the people offshore that are then being able to know, kind of like what you were referring to, Arnie, with respect to the little red Palantir logo, where exactly you need to make those differences. And that's, I think, the extreme value of that. Now, I think what Penna showed was maybe on a slightly smaller scale, because they're a little bit more modular. But I think it's, as Lunar kind of noted in the comments section, I think you could apply this to multiple verticals. You could apply this to the auto manufacturing. You could apply this to anywhere there's a factory where there's a piece of equipment that you need some sort of mechanic or somebody to be able to interact with. And as long as you're able to continually store and interact with the AIP and say, yes, this was a good decision, yes, this was a good recommendation, or no, this actually didn't help us, that's surprising because it has a, say, 90% success rate. It might go into the next opportunity of what is to do if that did not particularly work. So it allows you to kind of force feed and blur lines. And it kind of goes back to what somebody noted in the comment section as well. Then I'll hand it back to the room, which is talking about how they are able to now have, say, non-engineers being able to mobilize different sort of satellites and stuff like that to be able to take agricultural film and agricultural pictures to be able to ensure that, you know, it's getting the right watering schedule, the right chemical schedule, stuff like that. So it's like, to me, that's so important, because the amount of stuff that I do as an engineer within UDoc is really feeding our commercial teams. It's feeding our supportive teams, our legal teams. And if they now have the ability to log into, say, an AIP and get that data on their own, it really allows me to free myself up and figure out, what's really important, which is drilling for oil, finding the oil, developing the projects, understanding what's really valuable. And they can get the data that they need, like how much is this well produced? Is it producing a lot of water? Stuff like that, where, I might have to relay that and be kind of like an administrative person to kind of relay that data back and forth. It now allows me to focus on truly engineering, and it allows the rest of the functions that are supporting to focus on, something that they used to have to bug me to do, but now can access because the data is so well organized and clear, and they have the chat prompt to basically allow them to do that.
I would underscore one nice thing Lunar shared in the comments. He said, well, is this like a 3D Zoom call? Imagine how powerful it is. Like this is a use case where you see a kind of a metaverse that is actually useful. I think companies really don't give a shit of seeing the colleagues fully, but actually solving a problem like this, like a critical problem in real time, having also the people who have a knowledge along, being completely along with maybe the technician, while also having at a very easy disposal all the previous knowledge. I think it is really powerful. Are we going to see a Jarvis platform in 2022, 25?
Hopefully. I mean, what I thought when I saw this is that this is like the Matrix, like any non-engineer, like if this system is widely used enough, then, like maybe I can put on an Apple headset, open my car, and then the AI can tell me like, check here, check here, check here, fix this. Here's a video of how you change this. And I mean, CARP has been really underscoring that non-engineers, within a few minutes, they're able to perform tasks before. I mean, he even said at one point that in agriculture, where people don't speak English and they have been employed for 5 minutes, I was kind of chuckling, like, does he mean like Southern workers in the US who came in and they're like handling satellite data after a few days of being employed? That's really, really impressive, if that's what he meant. It kind of sounded like that's what he meant.
Guys,
So,
I received... Sorry. No, talking about this demo, I received a comment from Chris, who told me, look, I'm an engineer, and I'm actually doing something similar to what they do in the presentation. And I'm actually a highly trained engineer, trained for many years, and this stuff can actually replace me. Fortunately, it will take a long time, but the question arises, is like, are even engineers replaceable? Like,
CodeStrap brought up just a really good point in the comments on this, because I also was going in the same line as you. That yes, like some of these technicians who are fixing things, they do actually have very expensive tools, and that you will not have even if you're wearing your goggles.
Yeah, I think the entire commercial application of it is really interesting, because obviously you can build stuff on top of it, which is where it gets exciting. Let's talk about the last presentation that was at AIP Con, the one that kind of is hyperscaling boot camps. So the idea was Jack Dobson, one of the Palantir engineers, says Palantir has built their own internal AIP, and that internal AIP is then going to be utilized, as Vince was talking about earlier, from customers and clients to be able to do mini boot camps without the use of a forward deployed engineer. Let's start with you, Arnie. What were your thoughts on that, and what do you think that does for overall scale for customer count?
I mentioned it a bit at the beginning of the episode, and I think that to me is from an investor standpoint, like everything was great to learn, but this is that piece of information that has an impact on the financials going forward. And the reason is very simple. Like bootcamps help companies to help Palantir to get more interactions, effective interactions with customers, so to convert them easier and at a fraction of the cost, essentially each step that help Palantir automatize this bootcamp process is a big win, because it means fastening the cycle even more. And what's even more is not only you get faster, but essentially you create archetypes that could be sold. So even clients this way that can build a new solution, a use case that is useful, they can decide, oh, this use case is actually very useful to me, but what if I can actually sell it, because I want to sell it to maybe competitors or maybe to other companies that face a similar problem, that can be sold into the marketplace. So we are seeing how each small step actually becomes integrated with the bigger picture. So, and imagine how powerful this is when you have legacy companies developing use cases on top of AIP, because they have subject expertise into, for instance, real estate, and then they can sell this solution to other companies working in real estate. That becomes a way with which not only companies can modernize themselves, but also become intrinsically software vendors. That's what's happening with Airbus, that is essentially selling Skywise to companies as a service.
It's all about the network effects.
I think I was the first to underscore. We tend to think of Palantir as a company just generating revenues by selling. But in reality, the good perspective to have on Palantir, since it was founded by Peter Thiel, who financed Facebook, is we need to think of Palantir as an enterprise network. So the number of customers is essentially the network of enterprises joining. And the broader this network becomes, the richer it becomes, the interactions between this network become more powerful. And the marketplace is truly a tool that can leverage this. And I think it will start very small, but if we think in 5-10 years, well, more 10 years on the line, that is where the big value accrues to the Palantir, to the company managing the marketplace. Like right now, Apple is Apple, 2-3 trillion, not because of the iPhone, but because of the App Store that keeps generating an insane amount of revenues at a fraction of the cost. That is incredibly high margin revenue, and Apple just takes the fees on top of it.
2 points there. And Blake, no, I have not sold any of my NVIDIA. So if you listen to Karp talk on, I think he mentioned it both in Bloomberg and also in AIP, he talked about how the ontology and Foundry helps you maximize the outcome and what you're creating to beat the competition, ultimately to reduce your margins or to grow your margins, right? They reduce your cost of what it costs to deliver your outcome. And what I caught on to that is just some of the verbiage he used throughout that Bloomberg interview. People do not give him enough credit around his business savviness and understanding the actual capitalism of what they're doing. They think of him in the altruistic, what he talks about and why they started the company, everything else. But he is just as much sharp on the financial side as Sham is. And so they understand the constant change that their company continues to go through to improve the margin profile of their company. Like when I talked to one of their engineers, I talked to him and he said, we had to adapt. We had to change when Apollo came out. Apollo automated a lot of the deployment and functionalities that a forward deployed engineer would be needed for. So one of the things as a Palantir employee is you always have to be ready to change, because your role could be modified because of how they're changing and optimizing efficiencies. So if we were excited, hey, 80% margin, I never thought they'd get to 84, but they're not going to stop there. They're thinking about ways to, like you talked about with the AIP delivery, they understand there's a problem. They talked about it several times. There's a problem. We are oversubscribed for AIP Con 3, right? Do you think they're going to be oversubscribed on AIP 4? I don't think so. I think they will figure out a way to maximize that next AIP Con and still deliver the same experience, but also now they have a way of doing it without even needing engineers. And they're understanding that the demand now is coming so fast. So how do we solve for that?
It's really interesting when you bring up Karp's financial savviness, because I remember the Q4 2021 earnings call. Do you guys remember when he was in that kind of like purple pink room and he was wearing the blazer with on top of the white shirt? It was the first like video conference we had of an earnings call. And someone asked him about GAAP profitability and stock-based comp. And he went on this 5-minute rant about basically saying, hey, like, we're not going to keep our employees if the stock doesn't go up. So the stock-based comp is worthless to the employees if the stock doesn't appreciate. And the only way to get the stock to appreciate is if we're GAAP profitable. So he was basically saying we are aligned with investors on GAAP profitability. We know we need to get GAAP. We know we need to be profitable in order for stock-based comp to get the employees to stay, because they're not staying if the stock's at $6. And at that moment, I realized, oh, he's not just like some pie in the sky philosopher. This is a guy who was a venture capitalist when he was like 30 years old. He understands margins, businesses, GAAP profits, net income. And now we're seeing the realization of that at scale, now that the company is actually profitable. Let's do this one last clip that Matt posted, and we'll end it off there on his Twitter account. If you're not following Matt, please make sure to follow him. I'll put his Twitter link in the chat. This is Karp being asked about a consumer product on AIP, and this is what he had to say.
When will there be a direct-to-consumer, publicly available version of AIP?
Look, Palantir, you are seeing the tip of the iceberg when you are buying our product now. We've been working on these things.
You can't buy it if you're a person off the street.
Great. You are seeing the tip of the iceberg of our product development, and we are going to show more and more and more of what we have. And I think people, and I would also like, a lot of those people asking the question, by the way, are not academic. They are investors in Palantir, and they have supported us when we were down on the ropes. And those are the people that we are fighting for.
Matt, what do you think he was trying to say in that whole 30 seconds?
I think what a lot of people don't recognize is that these guys don't just talk the talk, right? These guys use their own products. They're creating products every single day. Before Apollo was rolled out, it wasn't like it was some lackadaisical sort of rollout. It was like these guys had been implementing it within their organization for many moons. I saw the same thing with Foundry. These guys literally live their life, and this is kind of what I try to iterate every time when I walk onto this show, is like these guys are iterating their life because they understand from a data-focused perspective. They might not know petroleum engineering. They might not know aviation. They might not know rocket science, but they'll ask you all the questions that they need to be able to interlink because they're data focused first, right? And to me, I think that they have so many applications and so many different platforms that they're going to unleash into the world. And I've talked about this many, many moons, and it's not something I talk about one-off. It's something I talk about very frequently. There's going to be a product that's released in 2024. There's going to be a product that's released in 2025. There's going to be a product that's released in 2026. Just like Foundry was released in 2017, 2018 timeframe. Gotham was released before then. You had Apollo that was released in 2020. You had AIP that was released in 2023. So you're going to have all these products and additions to these products that are continually added on. FedStart, all these things that OSDK, all these things that can be modularized and people can get their business up and growing as fast as possible. They have so many things that they can do. And not only and we just saw another product, right? This ability to network and be able to gather, they literally released that. That's something that's rather new as well, right? So they're always continuing to expand their product list that I think people just need to recognize is they truly, I actually made this joke before, because when they came to our offices back in 2016, 2017, we were one of the first customers of Foundry on the commercial side. They were all using Slack, and I was like, when are you guys going to create your own application internally and like do something like that? They're like, we're working on it. And I never found out whether or not they switched over from Slack, because obviously Slack has now been bought out by Salesforce. But I'm actually curious. So any Palantir engineers listening, like Chad or anybody else, I'm curious what the hell you guys developed.
I can confirm they still use Slack, because I've been told I'm a Slack emoji on their Palantir chats.
Are they really?
Like there's like an emit emoji they click for some. I was just like, you guys are insane, dude.
I should send them my. I have some emojis that people have made of me in the past, like with me making sad faces and stuff like that. I should send that.
Dude, they watch us. Let's just say they definitely watch.
I know. But yeah, so I'm curious. I mean, these guys, they have products that they need to release for days, right? I mean, they're not just going to whimsically wake up one morning and say, "Oh, SDK is something that maybe we should put together." It's like, no, they've been thinking about that years in advance. Yeah. And so to me, I think some people didn't like the fact that he danced around the question, are you coming out with a competitor chatbot GPT sort of thing? I'm sure that when Palantir releases their customer or consumer focused product, it's going to be better, if not comparable, if not better, and maybe even more wild than is allowed. What you could think about is, and we've talked about this in the past, AIP is already kind of a chatbot, right? You're able to sort of link your proprietary data within your organization and be able to understand. You could have companies that are consumer focused that would allow their data to be accessed for the public. And then you could get better information, that might not necessarily be 100% open to, say, a Google or a Microsoft, but it is, say, potentially open to a Palantir, because they are kind of the pipeline that allows them to be in connection. And so if that agreement so comes forth, you could be able to create a revenue stream, not only from the ability to have a consumer-focused product, kind of like what you did, Amit, right? Like something very similar to that, right? You have this proprietary data that you've come up with Hobbit.ai that any sort of company can allow, and it could provide a revenue stream to that company, because obviously you could put advertisements or what have you on that. There's a whole magnitude of different products that they could release that I think are consumer focused. And let's not forget what they showed in AIP Con 2, where the North Virginia highway system, and if any sort of the highway was down, if you have the application on your phone, you get a text message saying this part of the highway is down. And that's all part of the artificial intelligence piece. Like, how is that not consumer focused? That's consumer focused to me. So I think there's a whole different wavelength of applications and opportunities that I'm sure companies will personally come up with that are very consumer focused, as well as Palantir specifically that will be consumer focused. But to me, when you're looking at some of these things, and I'll stop after this because I know I've been on a little bit of a monologue, it's very much easier, as you've kind of shown all of us here in this room today, how many millions upon millions of dollars that commercial businesses spend to be able to keep their businesses up and running. So I think about some of the valves and some of the work that we do. It generally starts with a 7-figure number, not a $5 or $10 number, right? And so it's a lot easier to make and justify utilizing Palantir on that scale to a business that could potentially shave fractions of a percent or even several percentage points off of something that starts with a 7-figure number than trying to help out an individual, right? Then you're more so focusing on like the Walmart model, where you're trying to get more volume than you are margin, right? So it's a little bit of a different mindset when you start to look at consumer focused versus B2B. And so I'm just very excited to see what ends up happening, because I know something's coming down the pipeline.
Arnie, go ahead.
Before you mentioned Slack, Palantir can actually develop something like that. And actually, they developed something like that. If we think of the demo that was released last year, I think Gotham Europa had that chat interface, which even secure. So it was like a chat for military purposes, which means for commercial uses, it's just a copy paste. It would be nice to hear why they still use Slack. Maybe just because everyone is still on that. It's just more common. But the important thing here is not if they use Slack or not. But what I also shared this week that I think is a very broad consideration, but helps us understand the company better. Tesla doesn't only makes the car, but is focused on building the machine to build the machine. Essentially, they want to be a platform that manufactures stuff that are superior. Okay, and the importance of this can be truly seen at scale, because then you can optimize production, be faster and leaner. Palantir, I think, is following a similar road. Palantir, I see that as software to build the software. They spent a crazy amount of time, a crazy amount of resources with the brightest people to essentially build the platform to essentially build whatever software you want on top of it, because you have a good infrastructure. And we have seen it with AIP, how fast that was to actually build something on top of it. Like 2 months, they have this new product that is completely changing the direction of the company. And you can do that with a fraction of the R&D compared with other companies, only because you spend so much time, so much energy during these 20 years with the brightest people to build this platform. Remember this, 10 million in R&D is not, that don't always deliver the same output if you have troglodytes into this expenditure. If you have 10 million with 3 people that are super bright, they deliver more output than 1 million of troglodytes. This to say, from this, we see Palantir has the ability potentially to build anything. If they really wanted to build a consumer-facing product, they potentially can build it. But does Palantir really want to sell it? I think they would be happy to build for fun, but I think it would be not the company focus to actually build that. But what I see in the near future to actually happen is what the newest partnership that was announced with Halo.com AI, which, by the way, the key people are also retail investors. Fun of us. This is essentially a platform that is built on top of Palantir, on top of AIP, to help people essentially maximize the value of their horses. And I think this is the archetype of thing that we are likely to see when we think of Palantir in the B2C. So essentially, Palantir being the entire infrastructure on top of which you can build a solution that is valuable, that goes to the hands of the consumers, but where Palantir is essentially the backbone that facilitates the emergence of these platforms. This is Meet Hailey, the world's smartest horse assistant. So I think we will see the explosion of dedicated assistants for each vertical. And I don't think Palantir wants to build like the general assistant. They want to build the platform on top of which any company with a specific focus. I don't think Palantir itself will ever want to become a horse specialist, but they want to provide the platform on top of which a horse specialist can build an assistant to essentially leverage the compounded knowledge that enterprise actually has on horses.
Yeah, I mean, they want to solve real problems, right? Like you heard so many times Karp talk about how since the dawn of consumer internet, people are getting dumber and slower, and everyone was laughing in AIP Con, and he's right. And so they really want to impact on whatever they build or enable that to be built, it solves a problem, and most likely a business problem or outcome, and it's improving margins. So there's still so many industries and businesses, both large and small, that can benefit from what Palantir is doing. So I think we have a long way to go.
Yeah, the horse thing was really interesting, dude. I mean, I saw that last night and I was like, damn, horse insurance is using AIP. So I agree. Maybe B2C is not necessarily like a personal AIP on our iPhone, but it could be more so consumer companies, which is maybe this horse insurance thing is more consumer than enterprise. They would be using something like AIP. So small businesses kind of using AIP versus the, the Uniteds of the world using it.
I mean, maybe it was too small, but I would underscore built with Palantir. Like, imagine how cool it would be if that build with Palantir becomes something that many people are proud to show.
Right. All right. I think that's it for us this week. This was super fun. AIP Con. Wedbush upgraded us to 35. So Dan is bullish on Palantir, which is awesome. And we'll see if the rest of the street follows. Congrats to Dom for NVIDIA. He is doing well. So
Hot Dom.
Hey, I hold a lot of Palantir too. Just NVIDIA's.
We want to be like you 10 years from now with our Palantir, the way you are with NVIDIA. So
and hopefully Palantir is, according to Kathy, the chip manufacturers and the software, there's an 8x difference. So Palantir should be making 8 times as much money as NVIDIA. So just huddle.
I mean, didn't you share last week a post like probably the perfect portfolio would be Palantir, Tesla, and NVIDIA? And previously, when I saw Dom, I thought, wait a second, that's the Dom portfolio essentially.
That's all I mean, that's literally, I have a couple of positions I'll be closing out and just pouring back into those 3 horsemen. So
yeah. Oh, 3 horsemen. I see what you did there. That's great. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We will see you next week on Palantir Weekly. Bye, everyone. Good night.